Hi everybody, welcome back to Let's Have Tea. My name is Demi. Let's Have Tea is my channel where I share my thoughts and my experiences with the hopes of passing on valuable information or just sharing my thoughts or even passing on lessons that I have picked up along the way. So if you are new, please subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, don't be shy. Really appreciate it. Thanks to those who already do that. Again, appreciate the support. Today, I want to talk about something that affects more than 170 million people across the world. And I'm doing it because one, March is Endometriosis Awareness Month. And secondly, I suffer from endometriosis and I have for more than 15 years now, probably close to 20. I've sort of lost track of the time. And three, because I realized that there is so much that goes on in the research community that we don't talk about as people who suffer from endometriosis. So I have done the work and gone to dig into the research, so I will share what I have learned with you. I want to say that this video is not only for people who suffer from endometriosis, but for people who might be around someone who has endometriosis. So understanding that as a partner, as a parent, as a friend, whoever you are in someone who suffers from endometriosis' life, you have a role to play in how you can support them to live a better quality of life. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is what endometriosis is. It's very easy to get lost in the weeds here, so I'm going to keep it really short and simple. And I will love for those who have more insight, more knowledge to please contribute to this in the comments, just so that we can make it a rich discussion. But endometriosis, first of all, is a pain condition. It is an inflammatory condition that causes severe pain in women who suffer from it, and they are mostly women within childbearing age. But it has also been discovered in women who have not even hit puberty yet. So it is a condition that sort of predates puberty in a way, and there are thoughts as to whether or not endometriosis is a genetic disorder or is a result of exposure to certain things that might trigger it. The debate about that is still on, but I would describe endometriosis with a definition that many people push back on, but it's probably the easiest way to describe it. If you think of a woman's menstrual cycle, every month within the uterus, which is the womb, there are cells that sort of form a wall, right? They form a wall and they prepare for a baby. So think about it as you decorating a baby's room. They form this wall and they're waiting for a baby to arrive. Now, if she gets pregnant, that wall stays and it is used to sort of like help support the fertilized egg so that it can grow. If she doesn't get pregnant, the uterus gets mad and it tears down the wall. It says, oh, I did all this work for nothing. I'm tearing everything down because I'm mad. And when it tears down that wall, it comes out as a period. In people who have endometriosis, the cells that make up that wall grow outside of the womb. So they grow on places like the intestines, they grow on the diaphragm, they grow on the kidneys. You can find them in almost any and everywhere. And what they do when they grow in that way is they stimulate an inflammatory reaction that manifests as pain. And I'm not talking about pain where it's like, oh, I feel a little uncomfortable. It is debilitating pain, sometimes where women are unable to walk, which it was my case before I was diagnosed. They have really heavy periods, and some of them suffer other comorbidities. So comorbidities that a woman with endometriosis might have would be fibroids, for example. Fibroids are associated with heavy menstrual bleeding. They are benign growths that grow within the uterus, and they take up space. So if a woman has fibroids, she might look bloated, or you might be thinking, oh, she's gaining that, like, I don't know, 30 plus weight, whereas she's just carrying fibroids, people. Or you might even think she's pregnant when she's not. So fibroids are growths that are benign within the body that are associated with a lot of negative experiences. So it can affect fertility as well. A lot of women who have advanced endometriosis are often advised to freeze their eggs just in case, because they never know. Endometriosis is also closely linked with something else called adenomyosis, which is when you see how I said the uterus is a muscle. It's not, think of it's an organ, it's not a muscle. The uterus is on its own and there's something that forms a wall on top of it every month. This is the most basic description, by the way. It's not medically advanced. In adenomyosis, that wall, those cells penetrate the wall of the uterus. So instead of just growing as a layer on top, they are penetrating it. So think of how you have ice cream. So when you have ice cream, you can have your caramel on top, okay? And that would be just the wall on top. But think about when you have like an Oreo McFlurry from McDonald's. The Oreo is sort of crushed into it. That is adenomyosis. The cells have now incorporated themselves into the wall of the uterus, and that causes pain and heavy bleeding, which basically means that women who suffer from these conditions have a terrible time every time they have their periods. But here's the interesting thing about endometriosis that makes it even worse. Even outside of a period, endometrial cells can become activated and cause inflammation, which means women who have it can be in pain at any time of the month. It doesn't matter. And it's pain where they can't walk, they can't move, they can't function, they can't think properly because it takes up every single bit of them. They also find that they might be more constipated than usual, which is a sign that the gut has stopped functioning, probably because there's a growth that's causing some sort of adhesion within the gut, or something has gone wrong. So endometriosis is problematic, is what I'm trying to say. And it is not a new condition. When I went into research, I went as far back as saying, show me papers from 1940s to 1990. The earliest papers I found were from the 1950s. So research about endometriosis has been underway since the 1950s, yet there is no treatment for it. It is very common for women who suffer from endometriosis to be misdiagnosed. I found a paper, and just by the way, if you see my eyes darting, it's because I had to make notes for this one. It is important. I found a paper by Dr. Cameron Nizat from 2011, where it was presented, or they presented at the World Symposium on Endometriosis in Atlanta. And what they had basically said was that a lot of women who presented with endometriosis back in the day were misdiagnosed with having pelvic inflammatory disease, or they were told if they were dark-skinned women, basically melanated women, they were told that they probably had a sexually transmitted disease. Now, I found this interesting because I have had a similar experience in 2023. So last year, I started to have really, really crippling pain outside of my periods. My belly was swollen all the time. I couldn't move, and there was pressure sitting on my limbs. So when I say my limbs, I'm talking like from my hips downwards. And it was pain that just shot through my legs. I couldn't stand properly. I couldn't breathe properly. I was uncomfortable, as though I was carrying something within my body. The pain got really bad. It started to feel as though something was squeezing my intestines one night. And this was around like 1 a.m. Before then, I had been unable to sleep because of the pain. I had taken painkillers, but they did not work. So I did what any sensible person would do. I called an ambulance, and they came to fetch me at about 1:30 a.m. I went to the hospital. If you live in Canada, you already know that, you know the story. Here in Canada, they teach the body to be resilient by itself because healthcare is not a thing. People say it's free. It's not free, but let's not get into that. Let's not get into the policy side of it. Let's just talk about endometriosis today. So I go to the hospital, had a long wait time, was eventually assigned a bed, but thankfully those in the ambulance had given me an anti-inflammatory drug that they fed directly into my bloodstream, so I was not in as much pain. However, when the doctor came to see me, she says to me, it had said on my file, because I told them everything, I have endometriosis, this is what it is. The first thing she says to me is, do you have a sexually transmitted disease? And I said, I don't know. You have my blood samples. Like, did you check? Is there something I should be aware of? And she was like, no, I was just checking to see if you knew. So this story that Dr. Cameron Nizat presented in 2011 is still happening in 2023, where if you show up, there is an assumption, even though it says very clearly that this is endometriosis, that if you're a dark-skinned woman, you might have a sexually transmitted disease. Dr. Nizat's paper is absolutely worth reading. It is about 65 pages, if I remember correctly, but it is great. So don't hesitate. Read it, and it is open access, so you don't even have to pay for it, which is amazing. That said, here are some of the things I have learned about endometriosis. First things first is sleep. We talk about endometriosis a lot, and there's a lot of discussion around diet, which I will get into in a bit, but we hardly talk about sleep. not sleeping enough is a stress initiator for your body. And when your body is in stress mode, you are highly likely to trigger an inflammatory response of some sort. Endometriosis also thrives when you don't sleep well because it sees all the inflammation going around and it's like, I am happy to join in. And what this study found, this study by Christina Orion and her colleagues in 2020, was that women who have endometriosis tend to have poor sleep quality, mostly because the disease itself affects your sleep, but also because if you have poor sleep quality, it's like a cyclical thing, you are likely to influence the disease positively. So, what's the best thing you can do about this? I take a cup of chamomile tea every night because I need to relax my brain. I take a cup of chamomile tea, I take a shower every evening, and I also try my best to do bedtime yoga. Not because I'm trying to stretch my muscles, but because I'm trying to put myself in that state where I am detached from anything that would affect my sleep quality. And the reason I do this is because I noticed that whenever I don't sleep well, I am more likely to have an inflammatory response that presents as pain. The second thing is iron. If you have endometriosis, you already know the lethargy that comes with it. Like you feel very lethargic. You haven't done anything, but there are days when you just can't get out of bed. The first time this happened to me, I was shocked. I was lying in bed. I'd just woken up. I was ready to go to work, but I could not physically get up. Like my whole body felt like it was glued to the bed. No, it wasn't sleep paralysis or anything. I just could not stand up because I felt weak. That might be an indication that you have low iron. When I did a blood test, it was discovered that I had low hemoglobin. And because there was low hemoglobin, I didn't have enough iron, which meant I didn't have enough oxygen. Basically, your girl was anemic. I had to start taking a smoothie every 2 days. I think that's how often I take it. That helps me boost my iron. The other interesting thing I found in literature, though, is that if you have too much iron, you might help endometriosis along. So I don't know what the result on this one is, but I will say that taking iron intermittently has helped me increase my energy levels and helped me function better, especially at work and obviously in life in general. The third thing is diet. Now, there are lots of videos out there that will talk about how endometriosis is a diet issue, but that is not fully confirmed. There are quite a lot of studies that say they can't find the dietary causes of endometriosis. However, some of them have found associations between endometriosis and some foods. So, just to explain the difference, a correlation is sort of saying when this thing happens, this also happens. That's correlation in simple terms. Causation is saying this happens and it causes this to happen. That's causation. Association is more like there's a weak correlation here, it's the best way to put it. So there is an association between foods, some foods, and endometriosis, but not just endometriosis, even with like things like fibroids and ovarian cysts and all those other things that we develop. For example, higher consumption of red meat is associated with higher risk of endometriosis. This study was conducted by Yamamoto Aye. I hope I've said that name correctly and I apologize if I didn't. In 2018, where they found that women who had 2 servings of red meat had like a 56% higher risk of endometriosis. That doesn't mean that red meat causes endometriosis. However, I have a theory. So after I read that study, I went back and I did some research on hormone-treated beef. Hormone-treated beef is very common, especially in countries like the US. It's common in Japan as well, and it is common in Canada. And they do this because they use growth hormones, but wait to hear which ones: estrogen, progesterone, and I can't remember the third one. I think it's testosterone. I can't remember, but they use estrogen and progesterone for sure to grow the muscle of cows into lean meat. Now, if you are a person who consumes that, some studies say there is no indication that it is supposed to cause you harm, but there are studies that have shown that hormone residues might have an impact on your reproductive system. This study was conducted by Frederick von Saal in 2007, and what they found was that hormone residues in pregnant rats caused their male offspring to have lower sperm production. So that was a gynecological, if we want to call it that, link that was interesting to see. But there are no studies that prove that this is the case. However, there are theories out there that because endometriosis is estrogen dependent, and fibroids are also estrogen dependent, that there is a possibility that exposure to these products might be causing an abundance of estrogen within the body that the body is unable to metabolize, thereby leading to some form of disease. But again, nobody really knows. An interesting fact I did discover was that beef in the US has more estrogen than beef in Japan. That's something good to know. Not that you can import beef from Japan anyway if you wanted to. So reducing your consumption of red meat might help you reduce your inflammatory response or reduce your likelihood of developing advanced endometriosis. On diet, there is often a lot of conversation about how gluten might be the problem. People often say, oh no, you should just go gluten free. But I found an interesting study that recommending that people go gluten free can cause them to be deprived of nutrients that they need, because gluten sometimes is not the problem. So except you're someone who's a celiac or you suffer from some sort of gluten insensitivity, no, gluten sensitivity, not insensitivity, gluten sensitivity, you don't need to go gluten free. I learned this myself. So at some point, because my gut stopped functioning, I started to ask myself, is it the gluten I'm consuming? Which was interesting because I don't consume that much gluten. I eat bread maybe like once every month. I eat a croissant again once every, like, it's not something that's a focal point of my diet. But at some point I was like, oh, maybe this is the problem. So I stopped eating gluten. I stopped eating all dairy, and the problem did not resolve itself because that was not the problem. It was something else. Alcohol and frequent consumption of deep fried foods, I have found, may cause inflammation. As a result, I've had to stop drinking any form of alcohol, which is sad because I studied at Stellenbosch for my undergrad, had access to all the wine regions, and had wonderful wines at some point, which I can't enjoy now until all of this is resolved through surgery. But hopefully we'll get back to it soon. But just letting you know that drinking alcohol may increase your chances of having an inflammatory endometriosis related response and is not worth it. Deep fried foods might also be a problem. Not to say you can't eat them, but you should reduce your consumption of them. Because I find that there are things that I can eat, but when I eat past a certain amount, then I have a whole different story to tell. So the whole thing with diet is to say that there are no foods that are directly linked. So going vegan, for example, is something that people always say where they're like, oh yeah, just go vegan, da da da. It's not that. It has nothing to do with being vegan or not vegan. As a matter of fact, Yamamoto's study had found that while red meat presented a higher risk to women for developing endometriosis, things like fish, shellfish, poultry, and eggs were not associated at all. So it has nothing to do with whether or not you're vegan. Don't do that to yourself. If you don't have the desire to be vegan, you don't need to be vegan. You just need to reduce your consumption of red meat or avoid it altogether. That's a way to go about it. Vitamins B12 and D have been reported to be deficient in women who have endometriosis. So this was an interesting one for me. I never had to take vitamin D. I lived in sunny South Africa. And even when I lived in the UK, to be honest, winter wasn't that bad. I was always wondering why people were complaining it was grey. But just saying that taking that frequently might be helpful. So I now take vitamin D and B12 frequently. The other thing that's interesting is gut health. Your gut is your life. And when I'm talking about your gut, I'm not talking about your intuition. I'm talking about your intestines. Your gut is your life because the bacteria in your gut can determine the quality of life that you have. When I was in my undergrad, I undertook this study. We were asked to undertake research on a topic that had nothing to do with what we were actually doing. And I was like, yeah, why not? I will do that because I went through a year of research training and that's what that was about. So I went and did research on gut health and obesity. And since then, I've always had it at the back of my mind that the way I eat can impact the quality of life that I live. Bacteria in your gut, depending on their ratio, can either make you more obese or not. But that's not the point here. Studies have also shown that women who have endometriosis have an altered gut microbiota, which basically means that the gut bacteria are not in a healthy ratio, and that can create problems for them. So what I'm trying to say is work on your gut bacteria so that you can give the healthy guys a chance. Drink a lot of kefir, eat fiber, and give them the opportunity to impact how the disease plays out in your body. The reason this is important is because it has also been suggested that your gut bacteria might play a role in your immune system. And if they do that, if endometriosis, being an inflammatory condition, impacts the immune system, the gut bacteria might be able to reduce the severity of the disease if it is in the right balance. The other thing I want to talk about is perfectionism. This is a big one. Perfectionism is something that has been associated with women who have endometriosis. And I found this in a study, which for some weird reason I can't find now. It was an old study, but I did find a thesis by Cristina Zabor at the University of Bergamo in Italy. And what she found was that, or what they found, because I don't know Christina, what they found was that women who have more worry traits tend to have higher pain endometriosis. Basically means women who are more anxious tend to have a manifestation of endometriosis that is more painful than others. So it is important that you avoid stress, that you learn to let things go. Like, forgive the guy who broke your heart, just let him go. Don't think about him too much. Don't get anxious about anything. And in terms of like just living with people, be open, let them know that you have endometriosis, because a lot of people try to keep it a secret because they find it embarrassing or they feel like people will not understand. So keeping it within themselves increases their anxiety. So they are unable to process things, to live freely, let it go. Women who have endometriosis tend to be perfectionists. That's the old study I found, which I thought was very interesting. So I've had to tell myself, it's okay to let some things go. Like my therapist said to me, good enough is good enough. The last thing, if you're someone who lives with somebody who has endometriosis and you have to support them, be aware of these things, be aware of their diet, how they eat, encourage them. Do not make them feel bad for the days where they can't show up. Again, because people who have endometriosis tend to be highly motivated women, it can be surprising to people around them when they can't show up, and it's like, oh my god, why are you doing this? Don't do that. Understand that they have their days. They want to be pampered regardless of how high achieving they are. They want to be taken care of. Look after them, let them get enough sleep. I try to get 8 hours of sleep. I don't care what's going on, I will sleep. And I will leave a place early so I can sleep. I will avoid alcohol so I can sleep. Don't pressure the people in your life who have endometriosis to drink alcohol. Don't pressure them to go vegan because that's not helpful. Don't pressure them to do things that will not yield any results. Endometriosis is real. I hope you found this video useful. Please leave comments if you have any thoughts that you would like to share, or anything that you've done that has worked for you. Would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.